Yes, so today is the day the new series called Unveil starts. And today, this sermon here is a prologue to the Gospel of Mark. Gospel of Mark actually starts next week, but today we're going to learn about Mark. Okay, so the Gospel of Mark is the shortest gospel of the four, and it is a kind of an action-packed, fast-paced book. And I'll tell you more about it once we get started, but it's really, really fast. And if we do like a verse-by-verse study, it will still take a couple of years to finish, but we're going to finish it in 3 seasons, okay, with 6 episodes each, okay? So season 1, episode 1 through 6, and season 2 and season 3. And we got the whole like poster and Netflix-esque design going on, the thumbnail and everything done by the graphic designing team. So I want to thank you for that. So anyway, I want to kind of get you into and get you immersed into the Gospel of Mark and learn about Jesus all throughout the story of Mark, okay? So today is the prologue of Gospel of Mark, and we're going to learn about the author. So Mark is the author. His name is Mark, but he also was called John. John, who is called Mark. John Mark. So Bible says he had both names. John, the Yohanan, which is his Jewish name, and Mark or Marcos is his Greek name. So they went by both names, and his story is not really exclusively dealt with in the New Testament. A lot of things that we know, we do get it from the Bible, but there's a church tradition history recorded about him. So we can learn about what happened and who he was and what kind of person he was and things like that. Okay. What we can know about Book of John is he was a man of a second chance. Okay. Gospel of Mark. Mark is a man of second chance. He failed big time. Okay. He let everybody down. He failed, but he was restored back, and God used him for His glory. Okay. Because God was not done with him. Even when he thought he was done, even when everybody else thought he was a failure, God wasn't done with him, and He used him to write, do all these great work, and then even write the Gospel of Mark for us to read. Okay, so before we get started, I want to explain to you the timeline about John Mark. Okay, when it happened in the history. Okay, so if you go to Mark chapter 14. Verses 51 through 52, it should be, yes, Mark chapter 14, verse 51 through 52, let's read together. Now a certain young man wearing nothing but a linen cloth was following him. They caught a hold of him, but he left the linen cloth behind and ran away naked. Okay, this is part of Mark 14, and this was John Mark, okay? He was about 15 years old, like your age. Okay, he was about your age, and he frequently hung out with Jesus and the disciples. All right, and then he wasn't one of those like apostles or disciples, but he was always with them. All right, so he was there on the night when Jesus was arrested. So this is a moment when the soldiers came, like after Judas Iscariot sold Jesus, and then the soldiers came to arrest him. And John Mark just happened to be there that night, and he was wearing nothing but like an outer cloak. And that's like, some people did that, I guess, back then. So he was wearing nothing inside, but he was wearing outer cloak. And then as the disciples scattered when Jesus was being arrested, he also scattered. And as he was running, a soldier caught his clothes. So he like took it off and he ran away naked. And he writes about himself, how he shamefully ran away from Jesus. So this happened about AD 33 or 34, okay, close to 2,000 years ago. And then about 10, 11 years later, there was a great famine that happened, okay? And it's recorded in book of Acts chapter 11. Let's read that real quick. Actually, we don't have the reference first, actually. In Acts chapter 11, if you refer to it later, Acts chapter 11, there was a great famine, okay? A drought, like there was no food to eat. The churches were having a hard time as the world was at that time. Okay, and at that time, John Mark was about 25 to 26 years old. Okay, he was a teenager when Jesus was on the night Jesus was arrested, and then about 10, 11 years later, there was a big famine. Okay, and then in Acts chapter 12, Apostle Paul and Barnabas took John Mark on their first missionary journey. Okay, so he was in his mid to late 20s when he went on his first mission trip. It was supposed to take a couple of years to go around. Okay, so that's the kind of like the backstory so far. And I want to give you a big idea for today's message. The big idea is God's plan is greater than our future. Okay, God's plan is greater than our future. When we fail, we think all is lost. Okay, it's especially worse if people around you consider you a failure. Okay, and that's what happened to John Mark. Okay, but at the end, we just read in 1 Peter and then Colossians, he was accepted back into ministry. Okay, 1 Peter was written about AD 62, and Peter calls Mark his son, not his like a blood-related son, but his spiritual son, like a protege or like a student who followed Peter. Okay, so and Gospel of Mark was actually Peter's account of Jesus. So Peter and his protege John Mark, Peter told him all about Jesus, what he learned during his time with Jesus, all the things that he's seen, and the miracles and all these things, even the crucifixion, all that stuff. Peter told John Mark, and John Mark wrote it all down, and that's where we get the Gospel of Mark from. And then the Colossians, which we also read during our scripture reading, was around AD 60. Okay, so Paul calls Mark his fellow prisoner. Okay, when Paul was imprisoned, Mark was there with him, assisting him, supporting him in the Roman prison. Okay, so all these things happened about 15 years after Mark's failure. We haven't really talked about his failure yet, but we're going to talk about it now. And he was accepted back into ministry, and it was like a happy ending. Okay, so Book of Acts records what happened to Mark. Okay, so John Mark's mother's name was Mary, not the Mary that we know, but she was also Mary. Mary was a common name, and Mary's house, supposedly a big house, it was a gathering place for all the disciples, and it's like a prayer meeting kind of place. Okay, and I don't know if you remember, but like in Acts chapter 2, when Peter was imprisoned, that's where they gathered to pray for Peter's release. Okay, so Mark, his mother is also a Christian, a very faithful woman, served God, served the disciples, served the church, and Mark was always part of that. Okay, and that's why I think Paul considered him highly. Right, it's a young man in his mid to late, not a young man anymore, but mid to late 20s. He was there with Jesus in his teens. He's seen everything. He's learned everything. Now Paul thought, okay, Mark is ready to go. Okay, Mark, I want to take you with me to this first missionary journey to plant churches throughout Asia Minor. Okay, so Mark, Paul, and Barnabas took him on the mission trip in AD 45. Okay, all right. So let's go to Acts chapter 13. Actually, verse 13. Let's read this together. Paul and his companions set sail from Paphos and came to Perga in Pamphylia, but John Mark left them and went back to Jerusalem. Okay, so this Perga in Pamphylia was only their second stop. Okay, their first stop was Cyprus, and from Cyprus they went to Perga, and John Mark just left them. Okay, so the failure was that he ran away from the missions. Okay, he didn't even get very far, right? So Mark, Paul thought Mark, he considered him highly. Right? He's a great man of God, maybe the future of the church, and wanted to give him a chance and teach him and guide him. But Mark didn't last that long, maybe a few months, and then he just ran away back to Jerusalem. By the way, Pamphylia or Perga is somewhere in the modern-day Turkey. Anyway, so John Mark left Paul and Barnabas, went to Jerusalem, and the thing is, like, it's not like Mark had anything else pressing back in Jerusalem. Like, his mother wasn't sick or anything like that. He just gave up. The work was too hard. The mission work was more taxing for him than he ever thought. So he gave up. Okay. When you are doing work for God, sometimes things will get difficult. Okay. Mission trip when we went this summer, it was hard, wasn't it? We had to gather every Sunday for months to prepare ahead of time. And even when we got there, even after all those preparation, when we got there, it was still, you guys felt like it wasn't enough, right? Most of you think that we could have done more, we could have prepared more. So all those work, it still wasn't enough. It was a lot of work. When we got there, it was hard, right? It was hot, it was tiring, the schedule was so tight. And same thing for serving church. Serving church isn't easy. Okay, SLT, I know that you guys work hard. I know that you have a lot of stuff going on, especially seniors. You have a college app that you're still working on, and I'm throwing things to do at you guys, and you guys are being great. You're working hard, but it is definitely not easy. Right? We do Fall Family Festival every year. We do Holy Wind Festival every year, and I encourage you to serve, and many of you do serve. And the reason I ask you to serve is because when you were little, somebody who were older than you served you. Okay? Somebody who was older than you served you. That's why when you were little in elementary school, you were able to enjoy the things that church provided. And it's time for us to give back to our younger brothers and sisters. So when they grow up, hopefully, they'll learn from you guys to serve the church. And this tradition will go on. Okay? But it's not easy. It's not easy serving in the media ministry every Sunday. It's not easy serving in the worship ministry every Sunday. Okay. Sometimes we do feel like giving up. And that's what John Mark did. He gave up. Probably felt like a failure, right? He let down Paul, he let down Barnabas. Probably when he set sail with Paul and Barnabas, his whole family, his friends came out and applauded for him. Go and share the gospel with the world. Go and tell them about Jesus. And when he came back, people probably got disappointed. I'm like, what happened to you? And he couldn't really say anything, right? He just gave up, failed. He let his mother down. Course. So how do you deal with this? How do you deal with failure in your life? How do you recover from giving up in your life? How do you come back from disappointing your loved ones? Let's move on. So we're going to jump to Acts chapter 15. Okay? Let's read together. Acts chapter 15, verse 36 to 38. After some time had passed. Is that right? Do you have Acts chapter 15, 36 to 38? You don't? Okay, I'll read for you then. I'm sorry, it's my fault. After some time had passed, Paul said to Barnabas, let's go back and visit the brothers and sisters in every town where we have preached the word of the Lord and see how they're doing. Barnabas wanted to take along John, who was called Mark, but Paul insisted that they should not take along this man who had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not gone on with them to the work. You see, here, so they were done with their first mission trip, okay? And the second mission trip was for them to go around the same area and maybe some more and to kind of strengthen the churches that they have planted for the few years they were out there, okay? And then, so Barnabas thought it was a great idea. And he said, let's take along John Mark. And Paul says, no. I'm not taking this man with us. He gave up on us. He failed. He let me down. I'm not taking him. Okay. So Paul was done. He's not going to give him another chance. Okay. So Paul gave up on John Mark. Paul was a great apostle. Okay, he was a great apostle. Okay, so he's very respected. I learned so much from him. But he was only a human too, right? He had no patience for someone who quit. But Barnabas, the great encourager, he did not give up on Mark. He wanted to give him another chance. Okay, so there was an argument between those two people, Paul and Barnabas. So they were a team for the first trip. Second trip, before it even began, they argued with each other. Let's go to that scene where they were arguing. Verse 39 and 40, chapter 15, verse 39 and 40. It says that they had such a sharp disagreement that they departed company. And Barnabas took Mark with him and sailed off to Cyprus. But Paul chose Silas and departed after being commanded by the brothers and sisters to the grace of the Lord. So what happened? The duo of the gospel, Paul and Barnabas, they split because they couldn't agree on John Mark. And Paul gave up on John Mark, but Barnabas did not give up on him. And they had to be departed. They had to go separate ways. So Paul took a new person now, Silas, made a new team and went off. And Barnabas took John Mark, gave him another chance, went to Cyprus. Cyprus is actually Barnabas' hometown, the first place where they ministered together. So they went, and the rest was history. So a couple of things to observe here is Barnabas did the right thing, right? Barnabas did the right thing to give John Mark a second chance. Okay. Paul, although he seemed harsh, and we would say, why not? Why wouldn't you give a person another chance, right? But to Paul, the gospel work, the mission work was no joke. There's a sense of urgency. People are dying every day without Jesus. He wanted to go and share the gospel as much as possible, as quickly as possible. He couldn't be let down by his team member again. Okay, so he couldn't have anything to hinder his mission. So I understand him, but he was a little harsh when he didn't give Mark another chance. When you guys go on mission trip with me, we have 2 mission trips planned for next year. One to Dominican Republic again, the other one to Korea. And we're gonna train hard, okay? The game is on. When we are gathered to train, we're gonna train hard. You guys, I told you before the mission trip that you're gonna see a different side of me, okay? Because I don't yell at you guys for anything, right? I don't yell at you. I don't 혼내 you guys, right? But for the mission trip, I could not afford to just relax and just make everything fun. Because when we are there, the game is on. The spiritual battle is real. We have to be on point about everything, right? So that's why you saw a different side of me when we went to a mission trip, okay? The training is hard. That's why Paul, he knew the sense of urgency of the gospel, and that's why he didn't want to take the risk of having another incident like he did in the first mission trip. Okay, but God used both of the decisions for his glory. Okay, personally, Barnabas did the right thing, but I understand Paul. All right, let's go to today's scripture, Colossians chapter 4, verse 10. Okay, it says this, Aristarchus, my fellow prisoner, so this is Paul writing this, okay? My fellow prisoner sends you greetings, as does Mark, Barnabas' cousin. Okay, so you can see something happened in those 15 years. Okay, Paul rejected Mark because he gave up on him. But Mark, although he quit and he felt like a failure, Barnabas gave him another chance, and he went and he was a completely different person. This time he didn't give up. Okay? So Mark, although he failed, he felt like he was a loser, he quit the most important duty of his life to share the gospel. He quit, he gave up, yet he didn't stay there. He took the chance of coming back into the ministry. Okay? So much so, and he did such a great job that eventually, Paul, who initially rejected him, received him back into his ministry. And he was there with Paul, imprisoned in Rome, serving, helping out, assisting Paul in his later ministry. Okay, so God was not done with Mark. Okay, I would think that Mark would have done some soul searching. Kind of walked around his neighborhood, went out to the lake, and just, what did I do? Why did I give up? I'm such a loser. I'm a failure. Nobody's going to accept me again. Maybe God doesn't love me anymore either. Right? Did some soul searching, but that didn't last long. Okay. And this is what Paul says about Mark. About the same time when he wrote Colossians, Paul wrote a letter to Timothy. It's found in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 11. It says this. He says, "Only Luke is with me, so bring Mark with you, for he is useful to me in the ministry." He's pleading with Timothy, hey, I'm in prison right now. Luke is with me right now, but I need more people to help me. Bring Mark, because he is useful to me. I need Mark. He went from, I don't want Mark, to, I need him at the most vulnerable time of my life. So Mark went from a failure to someone who was useful for Paul. Okay. Not only that, John Mark, a failure, back with Paul. Not only that, Peter continued to work with him, to teach him. Okay? They were so close that Mark was such a good apprentice of Peter. Peter called John Mark my son, a spiritual son. And Peter continued to teach Mark about Jesus. Although Mark did have experience with Jesus, he was still young and he wasn't really one of the closest disciples. So Peter taught him about Jesus, all the parables, all the teachings, all the miracles that he performed. And eventually, John Mark, being a faithful student, he collected all the information that Peter shared with him. And that's why we have the Gospel of Mark, which we will study for next 20-some weeks. Okay? So many scholars assume this writing of Gospel of Mark was done about AD 50. Right? Peter was still alive then, and Peter died in Rome in the mid-60s or so. So anyway, you see, if you observe Mark's life, we can relate to him many ways. He grew up in faith, like many of you did. Okay, he grew up in faith. His family home was a gathering place for the disciples, right? His mother was a faithful woman. Mary was a faithful woman who gladly just served and gave to the church, okay? And Mark was with Jesus when Jesus was arrested, okay? He ran away, but then everybody else did, but he was there. He spent his late teens and early 20s in the church growing up like you guys have, and many of you will move into the EM ministry and will grow. Will spend your 20s with Pastor Davey in the EM ministry. Okay. Eventually, though, your faith will be put to test. Your faith, right now, maybe haven't been put to test yet because you're sort of under your parents' protection. You're under my protection. You're under this church's protection. But yet, eventually, your faith, individual faith that you have or you think you have, will be put to test. Okay? Many of you will do just fine, hopefully. But some of you might fail in whatever way. You might, at least for a short time, give up on certain things. Okay? But God is never done with you. God will surround you with people like Barnabas, and even people with like Paul. Because Paul, when he rejected Mark, I think Mark had a deep repentance of the actions that he has committed in the past. Okay, so it's kind of like a carrot and the stick, right? So Paul was necessary for Mark to grow as well. But you will be surrounded with people who love you, who cares for you, and who will encourage you, and sometimes will tell you what you have done wrong. Okay. So John Mark, the man of second chance, we're going to read his writing for the next 20-some weeks. It's actually 18 sermons, but there's like Christmas and Thanksgiving, so we're going to push some back. So probably 20 sermons or so, 20 weeks or so. We're going to learn about the witness account of Apostle Peter, which John Mark wrote down. And every writing, think about this, every word that he wrote, we're going to be reminded, the man of second chance. God did not give up on Mark, and he will never give up on you guys. Let's pray.